Hi, Mike. This is Chris Harrington, Jenny Palmer's brother-in-law. Is Colin there? I didn't hear Mike hang up because my wife Mary was screaming and banging relentlessly on the locked door of my home office. I waited 2 minutes and dialed Mike and Colleen's home number again. Listen, you bastard. If you call this number again, I'm going to report you to the police. Do you understand? Yes, Mike, I understand. But you need to understand two things. I don't care if you call the police or not, and more importantly, I've spoken to your wife, and there's not much you can do to stop me. Good night, asshole. This time, I hung up with satisfaction. Despite the continued pounding on the door, I leaned back in my office chair, closed my eyes, and tried to make the last important decision of this long roller coaster-like day. Call my sister's husband? I asked myself. I asked myself. I asked myself. I had met Mary's wife in high school. I was in 11th grade, sitting with my friends in the stands, waiting for Friday night soccer to start. Across from us sat a large group of girls from the sophomore class. As the game progressed, we took turns going to the concession stand. When it was my turn, I found myself accompanied by a pretty blonde named Mary. We bought hot dogs, fries, and soda and sat down next to each other. She was beautiful, smart, had a good sense of humor, and most importantly, she didn't have a boyfriend. In the middle of the third quarter, someone shouted, "Let's go to McDonald's after the game." Almost everyone agreed that the girls and guys in our group would continue the fun at the nearest McDonald's. Deciding to take a chance, I turned to Mary and asked, "I'd rather have pizza than greasy fries. Want to go to Tony's Pizza?" I was thrilled when she agreed. Mary and I dated every weekend for several weeks and seemed to enjoy each other's company. After 2 months of dating, we decided to stay together, and things have only gotten better since then. Mary was my date for prom, and I was on cloud nine, escorting the most beautiful girl in our school to the dance. I was on cloud nine until I ended up in cloud nine. 2 weeks later, on the Monday before prom, I was running to the tennis courts for team practice. I was running with my roommate, Julie Burke. Julie was on the women's team. I was a little confused when Julie said, "I think you're a really nice guy." "Julie, we've known each other our whole lives," I replied. "Why are you saying that to me?" As we ran, she patted me on the shoulder and said, "It's great that you let Mary go to the prom with Jimmy Bay. He's so shy and nerdy he would never have been able to go. Jimmy Bay was a nice guy, but he was definitely shy, nerdy, and, I suspected, autistic. He was Mary's neighbor and she always looked out for him." I wasn't surprised that Mary agreed to go to prom, but I was upset that she didn't think to tell me. By Friday afternoon, 6 more people had complimented me on my maturity. They thought it was cool that my steady girlfriend was going to prom with her friend and roommate. To be honest, I didn't feel mature. I was angry that Mary hadn't had the courage to tell me about the prom. I knew she would confess during our usual Friday date. She had no choice. At the last minute on Friday afternoon, I texted her and canceled our date. I was flooded with messages and voicemails asking me to call her. After a dozen calls to my phone, I finally texted Mary. "I've known about your graduation since Monday. At least 10 people texted me about it. Too bad you weren't one of them. I need a girlfriend I can trust." "That's not you." I turned off my phone and sulked. Mary and I didn't reconnect until the beginning of the next school year. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was walking to my car in the student parking lot. Mary was sitting on the hood of my car when I walked up to her. "Are you going to let your ex-girlfriend buy you ice cream at Dairy Queen?" she asked. That's how it all started. We were together for the next 2 years. The second year, we were in a long-distance relationship because I was attending college in New York. I came home often and was very excited about losing my virginity to her on a Saturday night in March, shortly after she turned 18. We dated Mary until she left for college the following year. 2 weeks into her freshman year, I received a letter from Dear John. It seemed she was enjoying college too much and didn't want to commit to a steady boyfriend. I didn't call or write. I was popular, got very good grades, and played tennis in the 3rd division. Starting the next evening, I replaced Mary with a steady stream of girls. I didn't see Mary again until she graduated from college 2 years later. I was working as an engineer at a local defense company and went out with my coworkers after a long week. I literally bumped into her at a bar. We talked for a few minutes, then went back to our friends. I admit, I couldn't take my eyes off her for the next hour and couldn't decide whether to follow her to the parking lot when her friends started to leave. I smiled when Mary's friends left. She walked over to the bar, sat down on a stool, and ordered a drink. When her order arrived, she turned her chair so that it was facing me and stared at our table. I watched with a silly smile as guys approached her but were quickly rejected. Only when she looked me straight in the eye and held up two fingers did I walk away from my friends. I had to wait until Mary told another guy to get lost before I could approach her. Two? I asked. Mary smiled and replied, yes. If you let two more guys ask me out, I'll accept their invitation. Mary and I dated for almost 6 months, after which we started dating exclusively and moved in together. 10 months later, we got married, and we have been living a happy and fulfilling life for almost 5 years now. My day started early. At 7:30 a.m., I had a meeting with a longtime client and friend. We agreed to meet downtown at the Marriott in New Haven, Connecticut, home to a stunningly overrated university whose name starts with the letter Y. Tony was already sitting in the conference room I had reserved. We chatted for a few minutes while I set up my laptop, laid out all the necessary documents, and poured myself a hot black coffee. Tony is a civil contractor whose company has assigned him to work on a new generation of submarine propulsion systems for the U.S. Navy. I am a senior mechanical engineer. My company is a defense contractor specializing in marine engineering. Over the past few years, we have successfully completed 3 small but important contracts. For some reason, we both encountered resistance from our immediate superiors regarding the current negotiations. We were told that we had one more chance to resolve the 7 remaining critical issues before the negotiations would be handed over to other employees at our companies. Tony and I worked until lunchtime and finally breathed a sigh of relief at 2:15 p.m. Do you think your company will agree this time? I shrugged and replied, to be honest, I don't understand why our last 2 offers weren't accepted. Tony asked, we've grown close over the past few years. Do you think this could be a test to see if we've grown too close? I smiled and admitted, I was thinking the same thing, then stretched tiredly and shrugged again. How about a drink? Tony suggested. I picked up my laptop and said, I have over 30 pages of notes to read. A drink won't help. I'll stay here and type up the important decisions in my laptop. I'll send you a memo of our agreement by 9 tomorrow morning. If there are any misunderstandings, call me right away. I have to submit my report by noon tomorrow. Okay, Tony said and started packing up his computer. I walked Tony through the hotel lobby, and after he left, I went to the gift shop, bought a Diet Coke, and returned to the conference room. As soon as I entered the room, I felt as if the walls were closing in on me. Deciding to change my surroundings, I gathered my bag and moved to a quiet corner of the hotel lobby. I contacted the office and learned that there had been a minor problem that morning. After that, I texted my wife and suggested that she have dinner without me. I settled into a comfortable chair in the lobby and got to work. The change of scenery did me good, and I got a lot done over the next few hours. I was so focused that I still wonder how her laughter caught my attention. I looked up and recognized Jenny, my sister-in-law, walking through the hotel lobby in a traditional little black dress and heels. She was heading straight for the front desk. As if that weren't enough, her arm was wrapped in the arm of a tall, handsome man. This man was not Jenny's husband, Scott. Without thinking, I turned on the camera on my phone and took several pictures of the couple as they checked in. I took another series of pictures as they walked to the elevator, and a final series as they entered the elevator. When the elevator doors closed, I quickly walked over and watched as the indicator showed that they had gotten off on the 8th floor. I was angry and confused. I loved Jenny and considered her husband my best friend. I admit I sank into a chair in shock. The stress of the day's negotiations and the shock of seeing Jenny with another man caused my brain to shut down. I didn't notice the man sitting in the chair next to me until he reached out his hand to me. He said, "Hello, my name is James. I'm the general manager of the Marriott Hotel." We shook hands and I replied, "Hello, James. I'm Chris Harrington. I rented conference room L122 today." James nodded in understanding, then asked, "I saw you taking pictures of the couple who just checked in. Do you know them?" After a moment, I replied, "I know the woman." "May I assume you were surprised to see her with such a handsome friend?" "I was very surprised," I told James. "Mr. Harrington, may I be frank?" After I nodded, he continued, "I'm afraid that if you stay here, there will be trouble. I've never been in the kind of trouble you're talking about, not even close. There will probably be a conflict, but I'll leave before we disturb your guests." James glanced around the lobby. It was fairly quiet and no one seemed to be paying any attention to us. He held out a folded piece of paper to me. I unfolded it and saw the man's name and address printed on it. James asked, "Do you think now that you have this information, conflict is less likely?" I held out my hand, and shaking it, I said, "I can almost guarantee it." I returned to my work and, considering that I glanced at the elevator every few seconds, got a surprising amount done. By the time Jenny and her boyfriend came out of the elevator, almost 3 hours had passed. My bag was packed, and I was already standing up and walking toward them before they had taken 2 steps into the lobby. I held my cell phone up to my face and took a picture of the couple as I approached them. Jenny was confused at first, but when I lowered the camera, her mouth fell open in surprise, and she turned pale. "Chris, what are you doing here?" "I'm here for a meeting." "Why are you here?" I could see Jenny trying to calm down. She paused and said, "Chris, I want you to meet Mike Charmeth. We work together. We're here to look at conference rooms for an upcoming event our agency is organizing." I looked at Mike, who held out his hand. "Nice to meet you, Chris." I ignored his hand and asked, "Mike, yes? Can I ask you a question?" Mike and Jenny exchanged tense glances before I asked, "Do you think Jenny looks better in those jeans, blouse, and boots?" I waved my hand, pointing to how Jenny was dressed at that moment. "Or in the black dress she was wearing when you went to the 8th floor to look at conference rooms 3 hours ago?" Before they could get back to their thoughts, I looked at Mike's left hand. "Nice wedding ring, Mike. I see you're just as much of a lying, cheating piece of shit as my dear sister-in-law." At that moment, poor Mike lost his composure. Gasping, he said, "Listen, asshole. You have no idea what's going on. Just mind your own business, and I won't kick your ass." "I'm sorry to tell you this, Mike, but the fact that my whore of a sister-in-law is cheating on me with a worthless piece of shit like you is my business." I slowly brought both hands behind my back and continued, "As for the kick in the ass, I'll give you the first one for free. You better do it right, because after that, I'll beat the shit out of you, send you to the hospital, and then call the police and press charges." I paused and smiled. Mike turned his head sharply toward Jenny and said angrily, "Can you handle this, asshole? I have to go." Without waiting for an answer, he turned toward the hotel entrance and walked away. I couldn't help myself. As Mike walked toward the hotel entrance, I said, "If I were you, I'd call your wife and let her know you're coming." Mike stopped and slowly turned around. Staring at Jenny, he repeated, "Please take care of this, Jenny." Watching Mike leave the hotel, Jenny turned around, put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Chris, let's go to the bar and have a drink." I wanted to, but quickly decided it wasn't a good idea. "I'm sorry, Jenny. I wasted several hours waiting for you to finish your party." Jenny flinched as I continued, "I need to go home, have a drink, and figure out how to tell Scott and Mike's wife about everything." Jenny squeezed my hand and pleaded, "I only do this when Scott's not home. It doesn't mean anything. I'm not hurting Scott. How long have you known me, Jenny?" She didn't answer but looked intently into my eyes. "I think at least 12 years since I first met Mary in high school. Is that right?" After a long silence, I said angrily to Jenny, "And in all that time, what made you think I wouldn't tell my best friend that his wife is a lying, cheating whore?" Turning to leave, I noticed the look on James, the hotel manager's, face. He nodded gratefully as I squeezed through the revolving door. Rush hour was over, and I began the half-hour drive north on Interstate 91 toward home. I set the cruise control for 78 miles per hour and turned up the volume on the country music station. The only thing that annoyed me during the drive was the constant ringing and beeping of my cell phone. It seemed like my wife was trying to reach me urgently. I pulled into the garage and closed the door behind me. As I got out of the car, I heard my wife Mary's voice. She was standing in the doorway leading from the garage to the kitchen of our apartment. "Where have you been?" she asked. I slipped past her and went into the kitchen. Throwing my work tools on the counter, I noticed Mary's cell phone lying on the kitchen table next to a half-full glass of wine. I picked it up, typed in the password on the keypad, and opened the text messages. Seeing that the message I had sent a few hours earlier had already been read, I said, "You know where I was. You read the message." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Heading to his study to pour himself a couple of sips of bourbon, he said over his shoulder, "Then tell me what you meant." When I returned to the kitchen, Mary was sitting at the table. She asked, "What did you do to upset Jenny?" "As far as I know, I didn't do anything to upset Jenny. Jenny, on the other hand, upset me very much." I watched Mary gather her thoughts as I sat across from her. Did you know Jenny was cheating on Scott? My direct question caught her off guard. She said it was just once. Well, that's a lie, I said to Mary. Jenny told me she only cheated when Scott was away. After a short pause, I continued. I noticed you didn't answer my question. Did you know your sister was cheating on Scott? Mary sighed, took a big gulp of wine, and said, Chris, this is between Scott and Jenny. I smiled and said to Mary, that's the first thing I agree with. This is between Scott and Jenny. My problem is that Scott doesn't know there's a problem to be solved. Damn it. It's none of your business, Mary exploded. I want you to keep your mouth shut. I leaned forward and rested my elbows on the kitchen table. Folding my fingers together in a prayer gesture, I said, you know me, Mary. You know me better than anyone else. Mary waited for me to continue, and was stunned when I stood up and quickly walked to the kitchen archway. I hesitated for a moment before turning around. I asked you twice if you knew about Jenny's affair, and you refused to answer. I'll ask you again. How long have you known about this? You know Jenny. She's always been a little wild. From 0 to 3, was my immediate response. What the hell does that mean? It means you're refusing to answer a question I consider very important to our marriage. What Jenny does when Scott's not home has nothing to do with our marriage, Mary said confidently. Well, we'll see about that. I leaned against the archway and began counting on my fingers. First, my relationship with your sister will never be the same now that I know she's a lying slut. Every holiday we celebrate with your family will remind me of your sister's betrayal. Second, you made it clear to me that you knew about her despicable behavior, and now I wonder if you approve of it. That's not fair, Chris. Third, although I don't travel as often as Scott, I do go on business trips once a month. For the first time in our relationship, I'm starting to wonder if you're cheating on me. Mary's eyes widened and she exploded. How dare you accuse me of cheating? I jumped up and responded with equal force. I never accused you of cheating. But your indifference to your sister's promiscuity makes me think you're cheating on me. I paused and looked at my wife before continuing. We both know you can't prove you haven't been unfaithful. All I have is my trust in you. And right now, that trust has been severely shaken. I turned and walked down the hall to my home office. After typing Mike Charmute's information into the internet, confirming that he was married, and intercepting both calls to his home phone, I decided to do the last terrible thing. I texted my brother-in-law, Scott. You're coming home on Friday. Am I right? 10 minutes passed before he replied, yes, I'll be there at 2:30. Meet me at the gas station. I'll be there at 4 o'clock. Does this have anything to do with that desperate call from Jenny wanting to know if we had talked? Scott asked. I was trying to decide how to respond when the phone rang. Hi, Scott, I answered, turning my chair toward the wall. I wasn't trying to hide my words from Mary, but I didn't want her to hear the conversation through the closed door. What's going on, Chris? It's as bad as it can be, Scott. Are you sure you want to talk about this on the phone? After a short pause, Scott asked, is she cheating on me? I replied, yes. The silence lasted several minutes, broken only by occasional sobs. See you in pit, he said. The call ended abruptly. I wanted to text Scott that I was available to talk any time, but in the end, I decided to leave my friend alone. I was sure he knew I supported him and would be there for him when he needed me. While I was talking to Scott, Mary fell silent. I'm sure she was trying to listen in. When I hung up, I heard her say through the closed door, please come to the kitchen. We need to talk. I considered going to the guest bedroom, but decided to finish my bourbon at the kitchen table. Sitting down in a chair across from Mary, I took a big sip of Knob Creek and felt a slight burning sensation in my throat. I looked at my wife and saw her mind racing, preparing her next attack. My brain shut down. I had no strength left to fight, and I knew that the last drops of alcohol wouldn't help. I waited for Mary to start when my cell phone rang in my pocket. God, I exploded. When will this damn day end? I pulled out my phone, looked at the screen, and saw an unfamiliar number which only added to my irritation. I answered the call with an aggressive, hello? A woman answered, I'm sorry to call so late. My name is Colleen Charmuth. Someone called our house twice tonight from this number. The calls upset my husband, and I suspect the caller was trying to reach me. Sighing, I said, Colin, my name is Chris Harrington. I called you earlier and tried to talk to you. Colin replied in a somewhat gloomy tone. Let me guess. You're calling to tell me that my husband is cheating on me with your wife. Almost, I replied. He's cheating on me with my sister-in-law. Her name is Jennifer Palmer, and I think they work together. She was silent for a long time before responding. This is the third time I've received a call like this, and it will be the last. How can a man do this to his wife and 4 children? I knew the question was rhetorical, so I offered, I have photos of them checking into the New Haven Marriott downtown, kissing in the elevator when the doors close, and returning to the lobby, almost 3 hours later. Jenny was dressed differently after their, date. The rest of the conversation consisted of exchanging email addresses and a promise that I would send the photos in the morning. After hanging up, Mary said, Jenny said he's in an open marriage. That's a lie. His wife and 4 children believe they have a monogamous marriage and a happy family. Mary looked shaken, pressing her hands to her face. I continued. Apparently, she caught him cheating for the 3rd time. She's going to divorce him. Mary stared at me in shock. I finished the bourbon in my glass and tipped it back into my mouth. After washing the glass in the sink, I headed to our bedroom. Lying in bed and thinking about everything that had happened to my large family in the last few hours, I came to the conclusion that I was not to blame for all this sadness and destruction. As usual, the alarm clock rang at 5 in the morning. Instead of starting the day with a workout in the basement gym, I quickly took a shower, got dressed, and left for work. I wasn't trying to avoid Mary. I needed to get to the office, finish the memorandum of understanding, and send it to Tony. Thursday was a busy day. Tony and I had to talk on the phone for 45 minutes to clarify the wording of some points, but by noon I had no problem handing the finished agreement to my boss. After lunch, I checked my emails from the previous day, and at 5 p.m., as usual, I headed home. I wondered what the evening would bring, and was only half surprised when I turned onto our street and saw Jenny and her parents' car parked in front of my house. This is going to be a damn long night, I muttered as I pressed the button to open the garage door. What did you say, Scott? Jenny began as I closed the door behind me. Glancing at my surprised wife, I said, I'm going to get changed. I'll be back in a few minutes, but I'm warning you. If your family is disrespectful to me in my house, I'm kicking everyone out, including you, Mary. I didn't wait for an answer and hurried to our bedroom. After thinking about how cowardly it was to climb out of the bedroom window, I decided to face Mary and her family. It was difficult to walk with an open bottle of bourbon, but I decided it was better to have a clear head. My second thought was, to hell with it, and I went back to the bar. 1 inch seemed insufficient, and 2 inches exceeded my limit for polite conversation, so I settled on 1.5 inches of my favorite amber nectar. When I returned to the kitchen, all eyes were on me. Everyone was sitting at the table. There was an empty seat between Mary and her father, Steve. Instead of sitting down, I leaned against the kitchen table, watching the gathering and wetting my lips with my drink. I liked my relatives. They were good, reliable people. Steve, my father-in-law, was a man I respected. He was straightforward, honest, and always knew what he thought of you. If you were on his side, you couldn't find a better friend in the world. On the other hand, if you crossed him, I was sure he could make your life miserable. Steve thought Scott and I were friends. My mother-in-law considered herself a tough, unconventional businesswoman. She owned and ran a well-known local real estate franchise with an excellent reputation. Although Betty oversaw the day-to-day operations of the company, all the employees knew that Steve was the driving force behind its success. Would you be more comfortable sitting here? Mary patted the chair next to her. I've been sitting all day. I'm fine here. Jenny had managed to pull herself together a little. She asked, What did you tell Scott? I thought for a second before answering. I texted him and asked him to meet me tomorrow when he gets home. I said it was urgent. Gathering my thoughts, I continued. Scott called and asked what was going on. After I confirmed that he wanted to talk on the phone, I told him that you were cheating on him. He cried for a few minutes before he could confirm that he would meet me. I was somewhat surprised at how stunned the family seemed. Mary was crying and saying, I told you to stay out of it. I wondered if she said that for the sake of the family. I replied, I told you it was my business. My mother-in-law jumped up and said, That's debatable. Before I could comment on the situation, Jenny asked, Are you going to see Scott tomorrow? Yes. And what are you going to say to him? She asked. I replied, I have nothing to say to him. I sent him the photos I took and told him that you were with Mike for just under 3 hours. I sent him Mike's name and address as well as his wife's contact information. I think I'll be a support for him and a shoulder to cry on. What about me, Chris? Jenny asked. Don't I deserve support? I smiled, looking around the table. I think you have a lot of support, Jenny. I agree with Scott on that. How do you know Scott isn't cheating on Jenny while he's away on business? Married men often cheat when they're away from home, remarked Betty, the girl's mother. To be honest, I can't imagine Scott cheating, but I have to admit that I have no idea how he behaves when he's away from home. Until yesterday, I never thought about Jenny cheating or my wife cheating on me. There were exclamations of, "How dare you?" and "That's unacceptable" around the table. Mary was clearly shaken by my statement, so I intervened and continued. At least I was honest and told Mary about it last night. I'm concerned about her arrogant and dismissive attitude toward Jenny's infidelity. Steve, the girl's father, said to me, Mary has never cheated on you. I can't believe you think so badly of her. I knew I had to be careful with my next words. I didn't want to turn Steve against me. I deliberately lowered my voice and softened my tone, looked Steve in the eye and challenged him. Prove it. After a few seconds of silence, I continued. That's the point, Steve. You can't prove that Mary hasn't cheated on me. I raised my hand when the protest began. All I have is 6 years of absolute trust in Mary. Last night, I told her that my trust in her had been shaken. That's not fair, Chris. I jumped up before Mary could finish. Last night, I asked you 3 times if you knew Jenny was cheating on Scott. You refused to answer my question. Instead, you changed the subject. You didn't lie, but you weren't honest. Yes. I looked at Mary as she confessed. I knew about Jenny's affair. I didn't support her, but I didn't want to cause a mess. Like this. She waved at her hand, indicating our current problems. I hoped her affairs would end the way she wanted them to and that Scott wouldn't find out. I nodded. Although I was very upset that Mary had covered up her sister's infidelity, I could understand why she had protected her sister. Remember our conversation about exclusivity a few weeks before you proposed? Mary asked. When I nodded, she looked me straight in the eye and said, To be honest, I haven't been in a romantic or intimate relationship since then. In fact, I haven't been with another man since we started dating after college. Call me naive, but in her words, I saw the angel I married 5 years ago. I love you and I believe you, I told my fiancée. Her family was kind enough to give us a few minutes alone before we continued the conversation. I could see that Steve was especially happy with how things had turned out. Betty asked, What are you going to do about Scott? I'm just going to support my best friend, just like you're going to support Jenny. Scott deserves my support and I'm going to give it to him. The next 6 weeks flew by in a whirlwind. Scott moved out of his house and into an apartment next door. He immediately filed for separation from Jenny, but did not file for divorce. Every Wednesday I had dinner with Scott and Mary kept the same schedule with her sister. It was Tuesday, and I was having lunch with a few coworkers at Clyde's barbecue bar. We were sitting at a table for 4 when a man pulled up an empty chair and sat down across from me. Hey, asshole, you must have forgotten about me. It took me a few seconds to match the name to the face. Hey, Mike, I hear Colin dumped your cheating ass. How do you like being a part-time dad? He smirked and said, Screw you, asshole. This is your fault. I looked at my friends, Carl and Joe, and saw that they were slightly amused. Turning my attention back to Mike, I replied, Yeah, your divorce is my fault. Mike laughed and admitted, I guess I'm partly to blame. But there are so many married women around I can't stay faithful. I began to worry about Mike's response, but he continued, I think I have a knack for entertaining married people. Mike nudged Carl to his right. That's exactly what I did with Jenny, his sister-in-law. When her loser husband left town, I broke them up and traded her for a few friends. He winked at me and said, She was very popular. His smirk left no doubt that the conversation would continue. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out an envelope, and tossed it on the table next to my plate. It was the kind of envelope people used to keep photos in. Mike's smirk told me everything I needed to know about its contents. I admit, my heart broke into 1,000 pieces, but I didn't let that bastard see that I was upset. I took the envelope and shoved it into the pocket of my sweatshirt. Trying to provoke me, Mike asked, Aren't you going to show this to your friends? He laughed again. What's the matter, asshole? Don't you have anything to say? I clenched my teeth, but I had to respond. I said, You're probably the dumbest asshole in the world. He was still grinning from ear to ear when I told him, "When I give these photos to Jenny Scott's husband, he's going to file for divorce. Since you're Jenny's immediate supervisor, how long do you think it will be before he sues you and your company? You'll be out of a job in a week." It was hard, but I started laughing. The idiot realized he had underestimated me and was thinking about his next move when I said, "You know I grew up in this town, right? What do I care where you grew up?" This jerk was in big trouble, but I wasn't in a hurry. I know everyone who's anyone in this town. Mike didn't look impressed, so I continued. "I also know the most despicable bastards. I suggest you get out of town while you still can. Go to hell. I'm not afraid of you. I have witnesses who can confirm that you threatened me." He pointed to Carl and Joe. They both laughed, and Joe said, "He's a real idiot. You're going to get divorced and lose your kids. You'll lose your job, and you'll be paying alimony and child support. And most importantly, I'd advise you to watch your back. Soon you'll be in a world of pain." Mike smugly pushed back his chair, stood up and said, "Go to hell, you bastard. You're nothing but a weak cuckold." My mind was spinning as Mike walked away. Later, back at the office, I looked at the photos and saw the most horrific details a happy man could imagine. The video was even worse and broke my heart. After gathering my thoughts and pushing aside the overwhelming sadness and anger, I called Scott and suggested we meet for dinner. After thinking about it for another 15 minutes, I invited another man to join us. Tears welled up in my eyes as I sat down at the table and continued to explain my plans. I realized that it would be impossible to act normal around Mary. I had to leave. I traveled almost every month on business trips for the company. Half of the trips were planned in advance. The other trips were urgent and organized at the last minute. I wrote to Mary, "Whitaker has a problem with his account. I'm going to the airport." That evening, Scott and I had dinner in complete silence. After ordering beer, I handed him the small stack of photos Mike had given me the day before. Scott was as stunned as I was. We agreed that divorce was the only option for us and discussed the possibility of suing the insurance company where Jenny and Mike worked. In the end, we decided to follow the advice of our divorce lawyer. We had been sitting at the table for over an hour when I saw Sal Morello walk into the bar. He looked around the room, spotted me, and headed our way. On his way over, he stopped to shake hands and exchange a few words with people at neighboring tables. Sal was a generation older than Scott and me. His daughter Trish was a year behind me at our school. Sal owned a large auto parts warehouse outside of town. 15 years ago, when I was 16, I was practicing my tennis serve at the school courts one summer. Trish was riding by on her bike and waved at me. A few minutes later, as I was picking up balls scattered across the court, I looked up and saw 5 of my classmates forcing Trish under the bleachers of the baseball field 100 yards away. I knew what those jerks were thinking, and I knew Trish wasn't that kind of girl. I ran out of the baseball field and was under the bleachers in seconds. Trish's shirt was torn. She was screaming and crying and trying to cover herself while those bastards pulled her shorts down. Stan Malley turned just as the rim of my racket hit him in the nose. His nose was torn open. Blood spurted everywhere, and Stan fell to the ground with a piercing scream. My blow from behind hit Joey Burns in the cheek, and he lost consciousness. I don't remember much after that. The 3 remaining jerks grabbed me and shook me while I was lying on the ground. After they managed to deliver their final blows, they got scared and ran away. Trish continued to cry while I tried to recover. We left Trish's bike in the field, and she helped me get to the car. I could barely drive, but I finally made it to her house. The car hadn't stopped yet when Trish jumped out of the front seat and ran into the house screaming. I had to get out of the car and walk around it to close the door Trish had left open. As I closed the door, I heard a crash and turned toward the house. A huge bull was running toward me. Its face looked ready to kill. Only when it got closer did it notice the wounds on my face and my hunched posture. "You're Harrington's kid," he growled at me. I could barely nod. "I need an ambulance, Mr. Morello," I told him. I leaned against the car and slowly, with great effort, lowered myself to the ground. Mr. Morello turned and shouted toward the house, "Call an ambulance, now!" Mr. Morello knelt down beside me, cupped my chin in his hands, and turned my head so that our eyes met. "What the hell happened to my daughter?" he wanted to know. "Some bastards dragged her under the bleachers at the baseball field." "Was that you?" he barked. I groaned and shook my head. "I was practicing on the tennis court next to the field." Every word was painful. His eyes flashed with anger as he asked, "What did those bastards do to my—" He couldn't finish the sentence. When I got there, they had already taken off her shirt. They were trying to take off her pants. She was only wearing a bra and shorts. If I hadn't been in so much pain, his icy stare would have scared me to death. I want to know their names. Stan Mulla and Joey Burns will be at the hospital when I get there. I smashed their faces with my racket. I gave him the names of the 3 other bastards as an ambulance and a police car pulled up behind my car. Mr. Morello leaned forward and we were nose to nose. I could smell garlic on his breath. In a voice barely audible, he said, "If you ever need help, come see Sal Morello." When Sal came over to our table, he sat down without introducing himself. I handed him the envelope with the photos and waited for him to look at them. When he looked up at me, I said, "There's a man here named Michael Charmut. He works for Jimmy Sullivan's insurance company. His hobby is turning married women into whores and sharing them with his friends. In the photos I showed you, he and his gang are with my wife and my brother-in-law's wife." Sal nodded understandingly, and I continued, "I hope that someday he'll stop being so handsome, his gait will become less athletic, and he'll have other problems." We sat in silence for a few minutes before Sal uttered a single sentence. "Since you're both going to be single soon, it would be wise to join a gym. Maybe you could go to the gym right after work every evening. You could work out together for a few hours and then go out to a nice restaurant for dinner." He looked intently at our confused faces before finishing, "You idiots think you can come up with a solid alibi every night?" When he was finally satisfied that we understood him, he rolled his eyes, nodded to me, stood up, and slowly walked out of the bar. I didn't go home, as I had told Mary I was leaving town. Instead, I stayed the night at the nearest Marriott hotel. I was able to speak directly with my boss and briefly tell him about my concerns. He agreed to let me work remotely and send my team an email notifying them that I was going on a business trip the following week. I was drawn to an uncomfortable chair in the corner of the hotel room. I sank into it, closed my eyes, and thought about the past few weeks. It was obvious to me that, because of my harsh stance toward her sister, Mary couldn't tell me about her affair with Mike and his friends. She was absolutely certain that I would divorce her. Mary was right, but as I pondered the terms of the divorce, I thought it would be fair if she was honest and open with me. Instead, Mary continued to lie to me. I found out about her infidelity in a public place, surrounded by friends and colleagues. I can't imagine a more humiliating and offensive scenario than sitting in front of my wife's pimp and finding out that she was a gang whore. She treated me extremely unfairly, and as a result, our divorce would not have been fair. Instead, I realized that I had to destroy Mary. I vowed to myself that I would destroy my wife, my love, and my best friend in the same extreme way. A divorce that could be called amicable did not exist for Mary. I struggled to get up from the chair, walked over to the office desk in the corner of the hotel room, and began to make plans. Until midnight, I worked out a strategy for how to proceed before divorcing my lying, fickle whore of a wife. If my plan failed, her heart would be broken. On the other hand, if everything went as I planned, that bitch would be left broken and lying on the side of the road. The next morning, I was able to arrange a meeting with a divorce lawyer for the following day. Despite the lawyer's recommendation, I did not divide our finances. That would have to wait. I checked into a long-term hotel and set up a remote office. Until Friday, I ignored Mary's calls and messages. Finally, I just texted her that I was going away for the weekend. She replied in a very upset tone and called all Saturday and Sunday begging me to call her back. Over the weekend, I managed to buy everything I needed for my plan. When everything was ready, I went for a long walk in the mountains on Sunday. When I returned to the hotel, I turned on my phone and started receiving messages and calls from Mary, all of her family members, and several colleagues. Apparently, Mary was very upset that I had disappeared and was trying to find me. On Monday and Tuesday, I worked from my hotel room. I tried to finish all my work as I had to leave the office the next day. Wednesday was D-Day. After breakfast, I checked out of the hotel and headed home. On the way, I stopped at the parking lot where Mary worked to make sure her car was there. I also placed a GPS device under her seat. It took me several hours to set up the necessary equipment and props, and by the beginning of the day, I was ready. At 2:00 p.m., I lit the fire in the fireplace in our living room. Mary and I often liked to sit by the fireplace on winter evenings on weekends. We drank wine, talked, and cuddled together watching the dancing flames. But today was not a cold February day. It was September, and the temperature outside at the beginning of the day was 29 degrees. I waited until 3 o'clock p.m. and sent Mary a text message. Just got home. My phone rang immediately. I sent Mary's call to voicemail, but she didn't leave a message. Instead, she sent me a text message. Bastard. I watched the GPS indicator on my laptop. I expected Mary to leave work immediately, but she didn't. She was going to show me. The fire was blazing, and I kept adding logs to the top of the pile. At 5:05 p.m., when the GPS showed that Mary had left work, the temperature in the living room was stifling and easily exceeded 100 degrees. Perfect, I thought to myself. My heart sank, I clenched my teeth and waited for the nightmare to begin. 3 minutes passed, from the moment Mary opened the garage door until she entered the kitchen. I heard her drop her briefcase by the door and sensed her presence as she stood in the doorway to the living room. When she came in, she saw me sitting on the couch staring at the fire. On the table in front of the couch was a plate of cheese and crackers and a bottle of wine. I was holding a glass of wine in my hands. Another glass was on the other end of the table for Mary. "What the hell are you doing?" "It's getting unbearably hot," Mary commented. Turning away from the fire and looking at Mary, I asked, "What the hell am I doing?" "I've prepared a romantic welcome for my wife." I noticed 2 drops of sweat running down her forehead and cheek. "Romantic." The word stuck in her throat and she didn't finish her sentence. Instead, she took a few steps toward the fire, bent down, and picked up a half-burned object from the stones. Taking it in her hands, she examined it closely, then took a step back and looked at the top shelf of the bookcase. I thought she might hurt her back. She turned toward me so quickly. Her eyes widened in horror as she showed me the smoldering cover of the book. It was the only part of the book that had survived the flames. Mary seemed unable to speak, so I said calmly, "We didn't have a lighter to start the fire, so I used a couple of these old books." I nodded to the empty space on the top shelf where Mary kept several books. "I only used 4 or 5. We still have plenty for the next fire." As I said this, I got up from the couch, picked up Mary's glass, and handed it to her. I saw her face change from confused to furious. On Mary's birthday, her father had given her a gift. The gift was a last year's most popular children's book. On the first blank page, Dad had written Mary a love letter in which he sincerely described his hopes and dreams for his daughter. Every year, Dad gave her the same gift for her birthday. She had 28 books, each one reminding her of her father's love. I clenched my teeth when I saw Mary flinch and hesitate. I wasn't sure if she wanted to hit me in the face or in the stomach. When her hand struck me, I felt intense pain. Her hand hit me in the left eye, and her nails tore the skin on my cheek. The contents of 2 glasses of wine spilled onto my shirt and pants. Her face changed again, and when she started crying, I saw complete confusion once more. Without saying a word, she turned and ran up the stairs to our bedroom on the 2nd floor. I heard the door slam behind her. Although I was devastated because I knew my marriage was over, I still smiled. My plan had worked perfectly. When I looked in the bathroom mirror, I saw that my eye was red and starting to swell. Mary's fingernails had pierced my skin, and a trickle of blood ran down my cheek. "Let's get this over with," I said to myself, took my cell phone out of my pocket and dialed the number. 911, "What's the nature of your emergency?" I heard on the line. "My name is Chris Harrington. I need police assistance for a domestic dispute. My wife has physically assaulted me." After I gave the dispatcher my address, she asked, "Are you in a safe place, Mr. Harrington?" "Yes, my wife has locked herself in our bedroom. I'll sit on the porch until the police arrive." "Do you need medical assistance?" the dispatcher asked. "No, I'm not seriously injured." In accordance with police procedure, the dispatcher remained on the line until the first police car arrived. I knew my conversation was being recorded, so I answered her questions very carefully. Almost as soon as the first patrol car pulled up to the curb, a second one arrived. 3 police officers crossed the lawn together. "Thank you for coming, officers." "What happened?" asked the old veteran. I turned my head so they could see the injuries on my left side. "My wife Mary hit me." "Why did she hit you?" he asked. I wanted to be careful in my response. I told him, "Over the last few months, my wife has been verbally abusive toward me. I suspect she is in a state of conflict. She is hiding an affair that she thinks I don't know about." In fact, I was planning to give her divorce papers tonight. When we talk to your wife, will we find any injuries? I have never touched my wife or any other woman in anger, was my honest answer. One of the young officers asked, Are there any weapons in your home? I have several guns. They are all locked in a safe in my study. My wife does not have a key to the safe. When the two young officers entered my home to speak with Mary, I said to the third, Would you like to see the video of my wife hitting me? He squinted, trying to understand what I was saying. It took a few seconds before he asked, Do you have any evidence of the assault? I haven't looked. I think I have evidence. When I finished, I motioned for him to follow me. My laptop was on the kitchen table. I needed to turn on the computer and find my account in the cloud storage. I opened the folder, rewound the video 30 minutes, and found the beginning of our argument. I pressed play and stepped aside so the police officer could see what was happening. He watched until Mary left the room and ran upstairs, then asked to see it again. After watching it a second time, he pressed a button on his shoulder communicator and said, Arrest Mrs. Harrington. Almost immediately, I heard Mary screaming from upstairs, and my heart started racing. I knew the cop had asked me a question, but I needed him to repeat it. Are all the rooms in your house under video surveillance? I didn't want to answer that question, but I knew I had to be honest. No. The camera is only in the living room. He nodded understandingly, scratching his chin thoughtfully. How long has the camera been in the living room? I shrugged and admitted, Not very long. Our exchange was interrupted when Mary screamed, Chris, what the hell is going on? Please, help me. I was about to respond when one of the young officers shouted, Sir, this is a police investigation. Please leave immediately. He was addressing the elderly man standing in the open doorway of my house. With the same authoritative air, the man said, I'm an official bailiff, and I have been instructed to deliver documents to Mrs. Mary Harrington. He approached Mary, and all three officers took a step toward him in case the situation got out of hand. The man asked, Are you Mary Harrington? When Mary nodded, he handed her the envelope and said, Mary Harrington, you are being served with a letter. In addition to the divorce petition, you are being prohibited from approaching Mr. Christopher Harrington, his home, and his place of work. Since Mary was handcuffed, he handed the envelope to the officer who was holding Mary by the elbow. When the bailiff left, I turned to Mary. I saw the panic and confusion disappear from her face. They were replaced by calm. She looked at me and asked, How did you know? Mike told me. While the two junior officers escorted Mary to the back of the patrol car, the third officer gave me his business card and asked me to send him a copy of the video. I walked him to the front door and watched as the first car with Mary drove away. The senior officer stopped halfway to my building. He turned and asked, I've seen you at pit stop sometimes, haven't I? Yes, I recognized you from Sarge. He told me, 4 years ago, I divorced my wife because she cheated on me. I'm paying alimony, child support, health insurance, and the mortgage on the house where she lives with my kids and her jerk boyfriend. Maybe next time I see you at pit stop, you'll let me buy you a beer and tell you what the hell happened here today. The next day, I went to work and managed to be more or less productive, getting through Thursday and Friday. I even groaned out loud when I got home on Friday evening and saw my father-in-law sitting on the porch. I pulled into the garage, got out of the car, and shouted, Come here, Steve. When he came in, I was already pouring 2 large glasses of Knob Creek. We sat at the kitchen table, slowly sipping our drinks for several minutes before he asked, Did she cheat on you too? I just nodded. Is there any hope? He asked. I took 2 more slow sips before I could calm down enough to be polite and respectful to Steve. I replied, This wasn't a one-time thing, and it wasn't just one man. I took another sip, then told Steve the whole truth. And it wasn't just one man at a time. He looked at me with disbelief, and before he could respond, I said, I've seen photos and videos that made me sick. Steve leaned back in his chair and turned pale. A tear rolled down his cheek. We sat together for so long time. Each of us was lost in our own thoughts and memories. Mary and Jenny didn't learn that behavior from their mother or from me. His gaze was icy. Everyone knows that. Several minutes passed before Steve stood up and walked around the table. When I stood up, he hugged me tightly and leaned against my shoulder with a sigh. Letting go of me, he walked toward the door with the gait of a 90-year-old man. Opening the door, he looked back over his shoulder and said, Burning those books was a despicable thing to do. I had completely forgotten about the trick I had used to start the argument with Mary. I almost shouted, "Wait!" I left the kitchen and returned a few seconds later with a small box. I handed it to Steve. When he opened it, he looked at me with a stunned expression. I said, "I know you cherish those books and I would never destroy them." "Then how?" He was too shocked to finish his sentence. I told him I went to the bookstore and bought a copy. That Saturday morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table as usual, browsing the local newspaper on my tablet. I smiled when I read the following. Hartford Times, local news. West Hartford police are investigating a violent attack on a local resident who was leaving a bar in the Elmwood area. Michael Charmouth was attacked in the rear parking lot of Top's Bar at approximately 10:30 p.m. He suffered serious injuries and was hospitalized. A city police spokesperson said that police have several leads and expect to make an arrest soon. It was a bright, sunny November morning. I watched as a red Ford SUV pulled up a few yards away from me and the driver slowly got out of the car. "Hey, Mike, you look terrible." I was in the parking lot in front of Jackson Physical Therapy and sitting in the open back door of my Ford F-150 pickup truck. A little birdie told me that Mike had an appointment at 10:30. I continued, "It would be nice if you put your handicap sign up so you can park closer to the building. You know, like other disabled people." In addition to his knee and leg injuries, Mike had a broken jaw that would require at least another month of treatment with wires. "Did you swallow your tongue, asshole?" I asked with a smirk. To Mike's credit, he walked over to me, leaning on his cane, and stopped 3 meters away. He knew that Scott and I had been questioned by the police and then cleared. But I suspect that deep down he knew we had something to do with his beating. Now he was sure of it. The hatred in his eyes was palpable. I'm sure he imagined the terrible torture that would last for months. I was sure that Mike and I would meet again in the future. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, so I arranged this meeting. Mike slowly turned and took the first step as I said, "Mary Marie Charmouth from Milford, Connecticut." When he turned around, I continued, "Susan Burke from White Plains, New York, and Lori Fitzpatrick from Brockton, Massachusetts." The hatred in his eyes turned to confusion. "If anything happens to me, if I'm in a plane crash, drown on vacation, fall down the stairs, I've asked my friends to visit your mother and sisters." I noticed a slight tremor in his hand as he clenched his cane. "My friends will beat them in the face like they beat you. They will damage their legs like they damaged yours. What about Mike?" I wanted to make sure he was listening carefully. "My friends will beat them in the groin like they beat you." I waited a few seconds for him to process this information before finishing. "While your mother and sisters are writhing in pain, my friends will tell them that it's your fault they got beaten up." I was surprised. Mike stared at me for a long time, then nodded quickly. I wasn't sure if he was nodding in understanding or declaring a truce. He turned and staggered toward the entrance of the building. I am happy to report that this was my last contact with Mike Charmouth. I gave my divorce lawyer power of attorney to handle all legal matters related to our divorce. We had no children. We earned about the same amount of money. And most importantly, I didn't care about anything except breaking up with Mary. A few weeks after I filed for divorce, my shark lawyer called me. She said, "We've reached an agreement on almost all the terms we discussed. However, Mary won't sign it until she talks to you." I muttered a curse word and was advised, "Just do it. Sit down and talk to her. Get it over with." Here's what I'll agree to. Let Mary sign the papers, and you approve everything to make it official. I'll meet her in your office conference room an hour from now after she signs the papers. I heard, "That should be enough." And the conversation ended. 3 days later, I was sitting in the conference room. June, the paralegal, knocked on the door, opened it, and said to me, "Everything is signed and notarized." She nodded and stepped away from the door, leaving Mary standing at the entrance. She had obviously made an effort to dress up and put on makeup, but it didn't matter. Mary was simply stunning, at least to me, even in her sweater and ponytail. She walked around the table, leaned over, and kissed me on the cheek, then sat down across from me. "Are you as nervous as I am?" she asked. At first I thought, what a strange way to start a conversation. But then I thought about her question. I shrugged and admitted, "I'm not nervous, more like anxious. I want to get this over with and move on." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she told me I was blackmailed. Mike was going to post a video of Jenny on the internet. Her father had called me at the beginning of the divorce proceedings and told me the same thing, so I wasn't surprised. It may have started with blackmail, but I saw the video. I saw everything. I was getting angrier by the second and I needed to calm down. After a few minutes, I continued. Maybe you felt forced, but that's no reason to destroy our marriage. Just because you found out Jenny was a slut doesn't mean you have to become one. Mary exploded. I was so confused and didn't see any other way out. What could I have done? You could have. And you should have. Trust me. I got angry when Mary rolled her eyes. I continued. Together with Jenny, we would have gone to the police and filed a report. We'll never know if the police would have been able to gather enough evidence to do anything. But we know for sure that his wife and employer would have found out, and we would have gotten some satisfaction. Most importantly, we would have stayed together. Unfortunately, you didn't trust me. To be honest, I don't know if you ever trusted me at all. What the hell are you talking about? Mary asked. I answered her question with a question. Do you remember why we broke up the first time? The first time? You mean in high school? Mary looked completely confused. What does that have to do with anything? In high school, you didn't trust me enough to tell me you wanted to help your neighbor Jimmy and go to prom with him. You must be joking. I was stupid and afraid of hurting my first serious boyfriend's feelings. Were you just as stupid in college? I asked. When she gave me a questioning look, I continued. On Labor Day weekend, before you left for college, we made love on a raft on Simpson Lake, and then we promised each other that we would be faithful and get married after college. Your promise lasted 10 days, Mary asked angrily. Are you saying that you were completely faithful during your first year of college? I shook my head and ignored her pointless question. I'm saying that, whether you agree or not, I doubt you ever trusted me. I don't think either of us would argue that I have every reason not to believe a word you say. You're a compulsive liar. And when you're not lying, you play word games and hide the truth. Trying to change the subject, Mary said to me, I haven't seen Mike since all this trouble started. When I smirked, Mary asked, What? Mike was in an accident. He can't perform at the same level anymore. What are you talking about? Mary asked. Smiling from ear to ear, I replied. Among his many injuries, he suffered ruptures of both testicles. One had to be surgically removed. Her voice was barely audible when she asked, How do you know? I know. Because I paid for it. She covered her face with her hands and stared at me across the table. He's a cruel man, Chris. I'm afraid for you. I met Mike a few weeks after his accident and we had a very civil conversation. I'm almost certain I convinced him that we should end our relationship. Mary's expression changed from horror to delight. I had seen that expression countless times over the years. You still love me, she almost shouted. I was so surprised by her outburst that I laughed. Mary was visibly upset and said, You can't say you don't love me. I shrugged and replied, You're right. I can't say I don't love you, but I also can't say I love you. But you have to understand that I don't want to waste my time and energy nurturing what's left of love. Mary almost exploded. Why did you say that? It's simple. I looked her straight in the eyes and said, You don't deserve it. Mary leaned back in her chair and visibly shrank. Tears continued to stream down her cheeks, and I could see her breathing through her open mouth. I took 3 photos out of the folder on the table in front of me. One by one, I placed the photos in front of her. The point is, I and my future children deserve someone better than this vile woman as a mother and wife. Goodbye, Mary. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.